Good morning, everyone. My name is Julia Anderson. I'm the Acting Executive Director of the Canadian Partnership for Women and Children's Health. And as part of our Learning Series 2019, we wanted to take an opportunity to talk to our entire membership about the Thrive Agenda. So many of you as members have been involved in developing and crafting the Thrive Agenda, but we also know that many of you have not been involved, and we really wanted to take this opportunity to bring everyone on board, to expand the conversation, to ask questions, to think bigger, and to think collectively. So what is the Thrive Agenda? What have we been up to at CanWaCH? The background to the Thrive Agenda is simple. We know that in 2020, all of the initiatives, all of Canada's leadership in women and children's health that has been built up over the past 10 years comes to a close. So we call it sunsetting in 2020. So that includes the Muskoka Initiative, it includes the SRHR announcements, and it includes many other things in the sort of bucket of Canada's leadership on women and children's health. So given that that is expiring and coming to a close, we wanted to take the opportunity to say, okay, what's next? And so in April of 2018, we had hosted a conference that was called the Post-2020 Agenda, What's Next for Canada. And at the same time, we were made aware and we're aware of many conversations. So this is not just a CanWaCH conversation that was happening. There was many conversations happening from different pockets of leadership. I think specifically of the work of the Future Planning Initiative. They were hosting roundtables. They hosted their own conference about what's next. And we wanted to, I think collectively, we all wanted to bring those conversations together and weave them together and to think collectively, truly collectively, about what's next for Canada. And out of those conversations, very organically, I would say, the Thrive Agenda was born. So this was Canada's global health community coming together to imagine a different world and really, I think, really meaningfully present a collective vision for what's next for Canadian leadership in women, adolescent and children's health and rights around the world. So we were pretty excited at CanWaCH to be part of this. We were excited to see it emerge and see the new partnerships and genuine kind of just folks putting their best ideas forward, their kind of lessons learned from over a decade of work in this space. And it's just been really such a privilege to be a part of it and to watch it all unfold and come together. So what is the Thrive Agenda? I'll talk about the characteristics of it in more detail throughout the presentation, but the basis on which we started is that we have to come up with a holistic approach that does not talk about the R independent of the M, independent of the N, independent of the C, the big sort of soup of letters that we talk about in this space with reproductive, maternal, newborn, child, and adolescent health. We needed to craft an agenda that stopped putting those letters into silos and really sees the layers of interventions that are needed throughout a person's life cycle in order to get them to that empowered place. So we started with the picture of, in my head, I started with the picture of, a young woman giving her stump speech at a political rally and thinking then back, the circles back about all the choices that she needed to make to get there and what health interventions needed to be at the ready in order to help her get there. So from vaccinations to, sexual health and reproductive, contraceptives and this kinds of things, without if you pick out any one of those interventions, it may very well happen that the woman doesn't get there. So it's sort of taking that empowerment lens that we see throughout the Feminist International Assistance Policy and thinking about it from a health-based perspective. The other premise is that, as I alluded to, we've been doing this for some time. We have learned so much as a sector, the Canadian government, all of our influence at the World Health Organization and in other multilateral spaces, we've learned a lot. And so we want to make sure that we're building on that learning to go forward, but we don't want to neglect the things that are working. So where things are working, where things are effective, we want to continue on those pathways, renew that leadership, make sure that we're not chasing one shiny thing and neglecting another. But so really, again, coming back to that holistic case and build on what we've learned. And we really want to sort of not elbows out, but really take up the space on the world stage that we've created for ourselves. We've been investing. People look to Canada, and right now in particular, a lot of countries are looking to Canada for leadership, for a lot of leadership in this space, because what we're seeing is aid is shrinking elsewhere. Commitments to women are shrinking, certainly elsewhere. So Canada has a real place in that. So the Thrive Agenda has a series of asks, and I'll start with the financial piece. Canada's financial commitment, as I said, to the current portfolio is ending in 2020. And so we are calling collectively on the government to renew its annual commitments of $1 billion and to invest an additional $400 million annually for 10 years. So 10 years was a unique feature of this agenda because as our members know all too well, as anyone in the development community knows, real change, long-term change, the kind of change that we're aiming for to work ourselves out of a job does not happen in 3 years, does not happen in 5 years, certainly also doesn't happen in 10 years, but at least with the 10-year horizon, first of all, you're getting us to the 2030 goals, because this is from 2020 to 2030. That's a exciting little, the math worked out on that one, but also you're really giving yourself the time to program in a way that you can offer consistency to partners. You can think through from a longer horizon, the kinds of changes that you're looking for. And it's not a matter of just get the proposal out, get the project up, and then close it up, right? Which is sometimes in the shorter time frames is how it can feel. So the 10-year commitment is really important. And again, like I said, the math is clear. That gets us to the Sustainable Development Goals, the end of the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030. The other unique feature is an investment that includes $500 million dedicated each year to the neglected areas of sexual and reproductive health and rights. An expansion of the Mexico City policy, even just a couple of weeks ago. What we are seeing globally is a retreat. It's not a retreat, it's like a turn and run from women's rights. This is incredibly problematic. It's going to cost their lives. It's going to cost young women their lives, no doubt, no question, and Canada needs to step up. This is the moment, this is the time. We need to see that sort of ring fencing and real long-term commitment to SRHR, not only because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the smart thing to do. We know these investments are some of the least expensive, most effective investments that a government can make. So we said, as part of the Thrive Agenda, we need to ring fence that money, we need to commit to that money, and that needs to be a long-term commitment. So it adds up to $1.4 billion year over year for 10 years. That's what we're asking for. So how is Canada already having an impact? We talk a lot about it, but we don't always sort of think about things in the big numbers. So I'm not going to read these numbers to you because I hate reading numbers, but if you just take a minute on this slide to look at the kinds of deliverables, the kinds of returns that we're getting right now with our investment. So we took through our project, through the CanWaCH Project Explorer, we took a subset of current Canadian funded projects and sort of estimated with about $1 billion spend, what kind of reach we're having and what kind of activities we're undertaking. And I think what you see here, I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around these numbers. It's hard to wrap your head around reaching sort of these massive unknown people, but if you actually break down the numbers and look at the stories behind them, it's a story of impact. It's a story of, adolescents, children, women, newborns, their lives being saved, their lives being bettered, and really allowing for a massive number of people to potentially contribute as citizens in the economy and as empowered people. So I think the numbers speak for themselves. Canada's having a tremendous impact with the money that it's currently investing. We talk also about the benefits of family planning as a really, I think the reason that we included this slide partly is because we have that ring fence 500 million, but it's also because it's a easier pathway to see. And the sorts of projections that folks at the Guttemacher Institute and others are coming out with, I think are really helpful when we're trying to make the case to Canadians around lives saved and around impact. So again, I'm not gonna read the numbers for you, but if you have a look at this and just let the slide digest for a moment, we're talking about thousands of maternal deaths prevented with very little money going in through the pipeline. I'll just let you digest it. And I think the other piece, I was speaking to someone who's sort of up on the Canadian public from a public engagement perspective, someone who runs a lot of polls. And we were talking about how it's really hard to conceptualize when we're talking about 1.4 billion. So people see that as a lot of money. It's actually only, relative to the Canadian economy, it's a very small amount of money. How can we make the case to Canadians and to politicians as well that, cost for impact? And I think we need to start getting better at this. And the Thrive agenda has tried through slides like this to help folks wrap their heads around where we're going and why we're doing what we're doing. So the investment case, I'll go through. We had it, and this was some of the fun of working in coalition with many of you. And for those who weren't around the table at the time, there was a lot of, it was a real challenge to think about how to not siloize, so to not describe in neat packages that are separate from one another, the agenda, but still how to break it down so that folks could understand it and so that we can make the case politically for why this is needed. So it's kind of this constant roll it up and then unroll it and see if you get it right. See if you kind of shape it out in a way that still really talks about that holistic case, talks about the need to continue to renew, but also how to do more and do things differently. So this is where we landed. It's not a perfect way to you could slice and dice it up a million different ways, but this is where we landed. Really talking about renew, lead, and accelerate. So renew is, again, let's continue doing the things that we know are working. Let's do them better. Let's integrate those lessons learned. Let's use the data that we've collected over the past 10 years. And let's really apply the principles of the Feminist International Assistance Policy to rethink and recharge or turbocharge what it is that we're doing in the space that we've been doing for some years. Let's lead. So I talked about the need for the scale up of investment in the neglected areas of SRHR. The gap on this one is growing by the day, and the fear that is driving partners and particularly those partnered with USAID funding, they're being driven out of the space. Canada needs to lead on this and accelerate. One of the areas that we identified as a sort of a separate gap is adolescence. So Canada has made a tremendous investment at Charlevoix in adolescent in education. We want to unlock those investments in education through investments in health as well, because we know that these two things need to be paired. So we have sort of a comprehensive adolescent health package that sees adolescents not as children and not as adults, but in that gray space, which is it's actually Canada could really take leadership on this. There's a lot of lip service given to this at the World Health Organization and other places, but everyone's sort of trying to figure it out. What does that really mean to talk about adolescents with their unique needs that are different from that of children, different from that of adults? Understanding this demographic is fundamental not only to doing good health programming. This is fundamental given the demographic dividend to the world, right? We have a huge explosion of adolescent folks that are on this planet, and the potential they have to make it a better one, make it a sustainable one, can't be understated. And I think Canada can really play a leadership role in thinking about adolescents as sort of their own category to be dealt with in particular ways when it comes to health. And then the other thing is data. So we need an investment in data. We need to continue and grow our investments in data. Adolescence is a perfect example. There's very little data on adolescents globally. This is not a Canadian problem, this is a world problem. So how are we gonna really make good decisions if we don't have the data behind us? So the Accelerate section talks about this adolescent health package, talks about an investment in data. So we wanted to lead you sort of along the pathways, although I've described them in detail, or the case for them. So the focus of the Renew pathway is health systems, maternal health, newborn and child health, better connected and focused nutrition, infectious disease, research, innovation, and policy. So we have here some photos from Nutrition International, from Inter Pares. Thanks to both for providing us photos, really helping us understand or picture what we're talking about when we're talking about the Renew. And I want to again focus on, this is not same old. I mean, the organizations, you as members have been doing tremendous work over the past 10 years on these issues. And what we know and what we advocate for as CanWaCH is you're getting much better at it day by day. You are learning, you are innovating. Like, this is some of the most cutting edge innovative work out there, right? And so when we came up with the word Renew, we really struggled because we didn't want to give the sense that it was business as usual. We wanted to give the sense of the tremendous leadership that's been built up, and the fact that we want to continue to do what we know works, and we want to continue to get better at it, as we have been for the past 10 years. LEAD, I think I've described this in a fair bit of detail, the need for why, and I'm thinking about it a little bit more because I just came back from the United States and some conversations with folks who are quite concerned about the Mexico City policy and the impact, and so I'm thinking a lot about it, so I'm focusing on it, and I think that also is reflective of the Thrive agenda. So the 650 million, and again, the math is part of one of the complex pieces of this, but 650 million was invested over 3 years in SRHR. This was a welcome investment. And what LEAD does is it doubles down on that. So it's taking into account the 650 million, so about half, if you break that up over 3 years, about 200, just over 200 is already invested, and we're doubling down on that. We're saying we want to get to 5. This is the smart thing to do if we want to again unlock all those other investments that we're making in education and in all the other kind of investments in Canada's portfolio. We've got to invest in SRHR. So we're doubling down. We're calling for a doubling down on that as part of the Thrive agenda. And then I described a little bit the Accelerate, and I think the really exciting components of the Accelerate are around that adolescent investment, and Canada really taking a leadership, a visionary approach to that. And with that vision, you need to have the investment come beside it. I was, as I said, I was recently in the States and talking to senior folks that had been part of multiple, United States administrations. And I was really struck, as well as having conversations with some of the multilaterals, I was really struck, again, as I have been before, at how Canada is looked to as a leader. So when, in conversations with the Global Financing Facility, they were saying, like, people ask us, what is Canada doing on this, to determine whether it's a good investment. Canada is seen as kind of being at the edge, the cutting edge of the best investments, the most effective investments. We're not the largest donor out there by any stretch of the imagination, but our goal is to be the smartest, and I think people globally were looked at in that way. And so we really believe in one of the premises for the Thrive Agenda is that the $1.4 billion is important, absolutely important, but it's also that leadership piece. It's also thinking about how are we working through our missions, our diplomatic offices, how are we working with G7 counterparts, how are we working at the World Bank circles, in the World Bank circles and the IMF, to really drive this agenda forward more broadly so that it actually leverages investments from others, from other donors around this really critical work, and the kind of work that we think can unlock the potential of the SDGs to get somewhere, I guess, on the SDGs. So that's all I was going to say. Again, I just want to acknowledge the work of many of you, of our members, in showing up at the table. Coalition work is a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work. And as you can imagine, crafting out an agenda that is representative of the good work that all of your organizations, all the researchers in Canada, all the health professional associations, crafting out an agenda that reflects at an aggregate level all of that work, while at the same time sort of separates things out in a way that is easy to describe in order to get the political buy-in that we need, is incredibly difficult. And we couldn't have done it without you showing up at the table. That was the critical component. And as well, non-members, folks that we were working in partnership with in a really exciting way, and for sort of, in some ways, for the first time. Thank you. Thank you for showing up at the table. Thank you for being here. Thanks for letting us be a part of it. And I hope what you find in the Thrive Agenda is reflective not just of CanWaCH, but of the global health sector. That's it. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to many, many good questions, thoughts. We for so long didn't want to put the Thrive Agenda on paper because we wanted it to be iterative and growing and evolving, but it's still there. We're still having these conversations, and we've got hopefully 10 years of investment post 2020 in order to continue having those conversations. So what you've seen on paper is really just a first stab at an agenda that's going to be much broader, much bigger, and going to require us all to show up at the table and continue to have these conversations. Thanks, everyone. Bye.